A startling revelation has the world in shock. On Easter Monday, Pope Francis, the adored Pope who revolutionized the Vatican's stance on social justice, died at the age of 88. But there are questions underlying the sadness. Did he really die naturally? Could his last days have been influenced covertly by the Church's disputes? Stay tuned, because what we're going to reveal next may completely alter your preconceived notions about the Pope's legacy. The world has been rocked by Pope Francis's death on Easter Monday. For millions of people, his passing signifies the close of a period of change, optimism, and, of course, dispute in the Church's contemporary history. Pope Francis was a powerful worldwide figure who was well known for his progressive views on topics including poverty, the environment, and LGBTQ rights. However, beneath his public image, the Church was enmeshed in mysteries and scandals all the time, which may have contributed to his premature departure. The circumstances surrounding Pope Francis's passing, the scandals that dogged his pontificate, and the potential mysteries concealed behind the Vatican's walls will all be covered in this film. We will also reveal some of the lesser-known truths that have caused both the devout and insiders to take notice. You'll have a better knowledge of the man who built the Casa, his struggles, and his legacy at the conclusion. But before we get started, let's examine the years that preceded this momentous occasion. When Pope Francis was elected in 2013, he became the first pope from the Americas and the Southern Hemisphere. He was born Jorge Mayo Bergoglio in Buenos Aires, Argentina. He had a very unusual ascent to the Pope. He was well known as the Archbishop of Buenos Aires for leading a modest life, favoring public transportation over private vehicles, and having a strong compassion for the underprivileged and disenfranchised. He soon gained recognition for these qualities, both domestically and internationally. Pope Francis distinguished himself from his predecessors as soon as he was elected. Since the Catholic Church was frequently perceived as being out of touch with the contemporary world, he was determined to reform its attitude. His first actions as Pope were audacious. He called for a more inclusive church that prioritized compassion and mercy over judgment as one of his first actions. His famously open-door policy on a number of contentious issues resulted from his adoption of the idea of walking with the people. However, everyone was wondering if he had actually succeeded in reforming the Church. In many respects, his progressive views were groundbreaking, especially his outspoken advocacy for LGBT+ rights. The role of the Church in combating poverty and environmental preservation. In order to emphasize the value of interfaith understanding, he even started conversations with people of other faiths. Although his progressive views won him praise from all throughout the world, not everyone supported his initiatives. There were several murmurs of disapproval within the Vatican from conservative groups who believed his pontificate was threatening the fundamental tenets of the Catholic Church. In the years preceding his passing, these inner conflicts started to show more clearly. He was criticized for being overly forgiving, particularly when it came to delicate subjects like divorce and same-sex partnerships. Others said that his emphasis on the environment was an unneeded diversion from the main goal of the Church. Many people noticed that Pope Francis slowed down as he approached his 80s. His once unrelenting itinerary of international travel, public appearances, and meetings with world leaders dwindled. Initially, it was thought to be a result of aging naturally. Many were unaware, nevertheless, that Pope Francis had been secretly dealing with serious health problems that the Vatican had concealed. He was hospitalized for an infection that necessitated surgery in 2014, little than a year after he was appointed pope. Some insiders became concerned, despite the Vatican's initial downplaying of the gravity of the situation. But folks were worried about more than just the odd procedure. The persistent health problems were the first to surface, more often as people age. Pope Francis was diagnosed with a severe knee condition in 2019 that significantly limited his range of motion. He initially walked with a cane, then subsequently, he was spotted in public using a wheelchair. The people couldn't help but notice how his health was affecting his capacity to carry out his duties, and these pictures stood in sharp contrast to the active pope many had witnessed in his younger years. The Vatican made an effort to reassure everyone that these were just aging symptoms. However, others who knew him well started to fear that something far more terrible was going on. However, things become much more enigmatic at this point. Pope Francis's health declined at a startling rate in the last months of his life in order to carry out his papal duties, and in certain instances, he even seemed to push himself over his physical limits. The Pope appeared to be a man who was surviving only on his own strength based on his lectures, public masses, and travels to different nations. However, was there anything more going on in the background? There were rumors that Pope Francis had been receiving covert medical care, and that some church authorities knew how serious his condition was, but decided not to tell the world. Was a cover-up carried out? Or was the Vatican simply trying to preserve the Pope's legacy and prevent the faithful from becoming overly anxious? Pope Francis was at the center of scandals that threatened to destroy the reputation he had cultivated over the years, even as he garnered attention for his progressive views on social concerns. A number of controversies started to surface beneath his outward image as the Pope for the people. The Vatican would have liked to conceal these scandals. The persistent problem of sexual abuse in the Catholic Church was one of the most prominent issues Pope Francis had to deal with while in office. There were still innumerable charges that the Vatican wasn't doing enough, despite his public recognition of the problem and his pledge to address it directly. Some of the abuse survivors who came out accused high-ranking church officials of shielding the abusers. Many believed Pope Francis's changes were too little, too late, despite his efforts to hold those in charge accountable. But there was more to the issue. An official Vatican report that exposed startling information regarding the Church's handling of accusations of sexual abuse was released to the media in 2020. According to the study, despite Pope Francis's efforts to purge the Vatican, there were still influential people there who preferred to preserve the Church's image over pursuing justice for the victims. Many people started to wonder if the Pope's reform initiatives were sincere or just a ploy to keep the Vatican out of the spotlight after the scandal. Then came the financial scandals that shook the Vatican's foundation. The Vatican's financial activities have been under close scrutiny in recent years, especially after claims that the Holy See was involved in dubious transactions came to light. There were widespread rumors of embezzlement and corruption, and the Vatican's finances were notoriously opaque. Pope Francis has pledged to make the Church's financial transactions more transparent. However, reports of poor management, unethical investments, and financial irregularities kept coming up. When it was revealed in 2021 that the Vatican was involved in a scandalous London real estate transaction, it was one of the most startling revelations. Some of the money utilized was linked to gifts from the devout, and it was revealed that the Vatican lost millions of dollars on a questionable real estate deal. Many question whether Pope Francis was indeed aware of the financial mismanagement taking place under his supervision, or if he had been purposefully kept in the dark. as the revelation sparked a flurry of criticism. Tensions inside the Vatican increased as a result of these events. Rumors of internal strife between conservatives and reformers persisted, with many claiming that Pope Francis's reform initiatives were being thwarted by Vatican bureaucracy. The more conservative aspects of the Church were directly at odds with his progressive beliefs, and it felt like every advancement was met with opposition. Pope Francis' health seemed to deteriorate more quickly as he approached the last years of his pontificate. Rumors surfaced in early 2025 that his illness was far worse than the public had been made to think. Those close to the Pope started to talk about something deeper, while Vatican authorities persisted in telling the world that the Pope was just coping with age-related problems. The mystery was heightened by the fact that Pope Francis had been exerting himself in spite of his failing health. Weeks prior to his death, in March 2025, he gave a number of public engagements, including a significant speech in St. Peter's Square. The Pope gave what was to be his last speech to the world, imploring the faithful to keep working for peace and unity while being noticeably weak and having trouble speaking for long stretches of time. According to Vatican insiders, Pope Francis was extensively medicated during these appearances to manage the effects of the unknown illness that had been afflicting him for months, as well as to control the agony from his ailing knees. Was this, however, sufficient to hide the actual extent of his illness? Some others think that much more was happening behind the scenes. In fact, it has been stated that a number of senior Vatican officials met in private during the successive papal transfer a few days prior to his passing. Could the future of the Church have been the only topic of these private conversations? Did the Vatican elite realize that Pope Francis was no longer able to carry out his responsibilities? Then Easter Monday arrived, the day everyone had been dreading. Francis, Pope, died quietly, according to Vatican officials. Age-related problems were listed as the official cause of death. The Pope's abrupt deterioration, however, raised doubts among many who knew him well. Many were left wondering if there had been other variables at play, because his death felt almost too well-timed, almost choreographed, coming so soon to Easter, a season of reflection and regeneration. Whispers became louder behind closed doors. Some speculated that the ongoing scandals that marred Pope Francis's papacy and the stress and fatigue he experienced from his unrelenting efforts to reform the Church may have contributed to his quick fall. Others, however, thought that there might have been a darker element at play. Did his life of hardship naturally lead to his death? Or were there more sinister forces at work, ones that had been subtly opposing him for years? The world was in mourning after Pope Francis passed away on Easter Monday. And choosing a new pope was a daunting undertaking for the Vatican, as Catholics around the world prayed for his soul and considered the legacy he left behind. The public's reaction was one of sadness. Behind the scenes, though, his death's aftermath was much more convoluted than anyone could have imagined. The more pressing topic persisted, but many were preoccupied with the choice of a new pope. In his last months, what had really occurred to Pope Francis? A number of startling facts emerged as the Church grieved his death, implying that his final days as Pope were not as tranquil and organic as they seemed. First of all, a number of former high-ranking Vatican officials have now come forward to say that they knew the Pope's health was deteriorating much sooner than the public was told. According to others, the Vatican purposefully minimized the severity of his illness in order to preserve his legacy and prevent a church crisis. Is it possible that the church authorities concealed his actual condition out of concern for a decline in public trust? Were they so concerned with keeping the Vatican stable that they permitted Pope Francis to fulfill his duties even if he was mentally and physically incapable of doing so. There have been allegations of a power struggle that grew more intense in the months preceding Pope Francis' death. In addition to the health cover-up, Vatican sources said that the Church's factions, those who opposed Pope Francis's progressive measures and those who supported them, had come to a standstill. There were even claims that the conservative elements in the Vatican had started plotting against the Pope in an attempt to install a successor who would undo a lot of the reforms that Pope Francis had started. The idea that some members of the Vatican's inner circle may have purposefully postponed medical intervention or more proactive care for the Pope because they were more concerned with their own power struggles within the Church is one particularly disturbing accusation. Did these people fear that Pope Francis's progressive program would undermine their hold on the Church's future, or was he just too much of a liability? In anticipation of the conclave to choose a new pope, the Vatican, however, the issue still stands. What will happen to the Church now? Many Catholics are wondering if the Church will continue on the reform route that Pope Francis started because of the events preceding his death. Will the new pope continue his legacy of social justice, inclusivity, and compassion? Or will the Church adopt a more conservative, traditional position again? One thing becomes evident when the puzzle of Pope Francis's unexpected and unexplained death is put together. The facts of the Vatican would have us believe that death is more simpler than it actually is. Although the public has been informed that his death was due to natural causes and old age, a more thorough study paints a much more sinister picture. As we now know, Pope Francis's last months were not just a struggle with his illness, but also a conflict with the same institutions he was trying to change. The secret financial scandals, the power conflicts, and the cover-ups. His final years were significantly more tense and difficult than most people could have predicted because of these forces that hovered over his pontificate. The question that still stands, and will probably persist for years to come, is whether Pope Francis's death was actually natural, or if there were outside factors at work. His health may have weakened as a result of these internal conflicts. Was there a planned effort to depose him in order to stifle his progressive initiatives and make room for a more conventional pope who would serve the interests of the Vatican's influential conservative factions? The legacy of Pope Francis will probably have a significant impact on the course that the Catholic Church pursues at this pivotal moment in its history. However, the reality of what goes on behind the scenes is frequently far more complicated and disturbing than what the general public is permitted to view, as is the case with any significant organization. Please share your opinions in the comments section below. For more startling tales and in-depth explorations of the Vatican's shadowy realm, be sure to subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. Remember to hit the bell symbol and like this video to receive updates on our newest content. As our examination of Pope Francis's last days comes to an end, it is evident that there is much more going on. It is unclear if we will ever fully comprehend the scope of the power struggles, scandals, and secrets that molded his pontificate. Pope Francis's passing, however, undoubtedly signals the end of an era and the start of an even more uncertain one for the Catholic Church. As we come to an end, Pope Francis's legacy is still intricate and varied. Not just the Catholic Church, but the entire globe has been rocked by his death on Easter Monday. The reality of his last days is far harsher than we may ever know, even though many will remember him for his generosity, progressive ideals, and attempts to bridge the gap between the Church and the public. The enigma surrounding his death leaves us with more questions than answers. From the Vatican's internal power battles to the cover-ups regarding his health, we will probably continue to hear rumors, insider information, and conspiracy theories in the days ahead. However, one thing is still indisputable. Pope Francis's passing has revealed a previously unknown aspect of the Vatican. There are strong forces behind the papal throne. The Catholic Church's future is currently in jeopardy.